The door didn't open gently. It screamed. Metal against metal. 2 years of my life ending with a sound that still rings in my bones. No family waiting. No apology. No explanation. Just a plastic bag with my clothes and a paper that said I was free. They called it a release. I called it a delay. Because the truth is, I was never imprisoned for being dangerous. I was imprisoned because I was inconvenient. For 2 years, my husband slept in our bed with the woman who helped lock me away. For 2 years, he told the world he was the devoted man who survived a mentally unstable wife. And the world believed him. They always do. I lost my name, my job, my home, my voice. I learned how silence works in places like that, how walls listen, how fear smells in the dark, how people disappear without ever dying. But I also learned something else. I learned how men like him get careless when they think a woman is broken. As I stepped outside, the sun felt unfamiliar, too bright, too honest. I closed my eyes and made myself a promise. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of precision. The day I walked out of that place was not the day I became free. It was the day his life began to collapse, piece by piece, document by document, lie by lie. He thought he buried me. What he didn't realize was that he taught me exactly where to dig. The parking lot was empty. No car, no familiar face, just heat rising off the asphalt and a security guard already turning away. I stood there longer than I should have, half expecting someone to shout my name, to say there had been a mistake, that I wasn't supposed to leave like this. But this was exactly how they planned it. 2 years inside ended with no witnesses. I walked to the bus stop because I had no choice. No phone, no credit card, no cash. Those were gone, the first night I was admitted. Standard procedure, they said. The bus smelled like old fabric and resignation. I took a seat by the window and watched the city move, as if it had never noticed I was gone. That was my first real punishment. Not the locked doors, not the medication, not the nights when someone screamed down the hall. It was this, the world continuing without me. I checked my reflection in the glass, thinner face, eyes too alert. A woman trained to listen for danger. I barely recognized her. My husband used to say I was too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. Funny how those words became medical terms when spoken by the right people. I got off near a diner because I remembered it from another life. Back when Ethan would squeeze my hand across sticky tables and say we were lucky. I ordered coffee, black, no sugar. The waitress didn't smile. She didn't need to. I took the first sip and felt my hands shake. That's when I saw him. On the television above the counter, Ethan, suit pressed, hair perfect. That familiar calm expression he practiced in the mirror. The headline scrolled beneath his face. Local executive opens mental health foundation after personal tragedy. Personal tragedy. That's what I was now. The reporter called him brave, resilient. A man who stood by his wife during her decline. They showed photos, our wedding. My smile cropped just enough to look fragile, controlled. Then her face appeared beside him, Sloane, her hand on his arm. Supportive, appropriate. The woman who whispered in his ear while the paperwork was signed. The woman who visited me once, only once, to make sure I looked broken enough. I turned the TV off myself. No one stopped me. That was when it clicked. He didn't just take my freedom. He took my story, and he was using it to build something bigger, a reputation, a shield, a future where I stayed buried. I finished my coffee slowly, forcing my breathing to steady. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud, sloppy. What I felt was clearer than that. Focus. Because if Ethan believed I would stay silent, stay ashamed, stay grateful just to be out, then he hadn't learned a single thing about the woman he locked away. And soon, very soon, he was going to learn what happens when the wrong person is pushed too far and given nothing left to lose. People always ask what it was like before, as if there's a clean line between love and destruction. There isn't. Ethan wasn't cruel in the beginning. That's how men like him survive. He was attentive, methodical, the kind of man who remembered dates and forgot emotions. We met when my life was small and his ambition was large. He liked that about me. I was calm, reliable, easy to describe. He used to say I balanced him. What he meant was I didn't question him. The first thing he controlled wasn't money, it was tone. If you say it like that, he'd tell me, people will misunderstand you. So I learned to soften my words, to smile while disagreeing, to apologize for reactions I hadn't finished having. The second thing was isolation. He never told me to stop seeing friends. He just reminded me how tired I seemed afterward, how agitated. Maybe you need fewer influences, he said once, half joking. I laughed. That laugh would later be quoted in a report as evidence of emotional instability. By the time Sloan appeared, the ground was already cracked. She worked with him. HR, compliance, clean clothes, calm voice, eyes that watched more than they blinked, the kind of woman who knew how systems worked and how people didn't. She asked me questions that sounded like concern. How are you sleeping? Do you ever feel overwhelmed? Does stress make you emotional? Ethan would listen, quietly. Afterward, he'd repeat her words as if they were his own thoughts. She might be right, he'd say. You've been different. Different. That word followed me everywhere. If I cried, it was instability. If I stayed quiet, it was withdrawal. If I pushed back, it was aggression. He started keeping notes. I didn't know that then. I only knew he'd begun to look at me the way someone looks at a problem they intend to solve. I suggested counseling once. He agreed too quickly. The therapist was recommended by Sloan. The room was neutral. The questions weren't. They spoke in careful phrases that turned feelings into symptoms. Ethan held my hand the entire time. That detail mattered later, because when they asked if I felt supported, he squeezed, and I nodded. I still believed we were fixing something. I didn't understand that they weren't trying to help me heal. They were preparing a file, a timeline, a narrative. And in that story, Ethan was the patient husband, Sloan was the professional witness, and I was already being described in past tense. The night everything collapsed was ordinary. That's the part that still haunts me. No shouting, no slammed doors, no warning signs screaming for attention. Just dinner plates cooling on the table, and Ethan moving a little too carefully. He asked how I was feeling. Not lovingly. Clinically. I told him the truth, that I felt watched, that something was wrong. He nodded like a man confirming a diagnosis. Sloan arrived 20 minutes later. She said she was just checking in. She brought paperwork and a calm that filled the room too easily. They sat across from me as if this were an intervention. Sloan spoke first. She said words like escalation and concern for safety and documented pattern. I laughed. That was mistake number 1. Ethan didn't laugh. He looked relieved. Sloan asked if I'd been sleeping, if I'd taken my medication, if I'd had thoughts that scared me. I asked her when she'd stopped being HR and started being my doctor. That was mistake number 2. Ethan stood up and stepped away from me. That was the moment. Not the sirens, not the restraints, that single step backward. He said, I just want you to get help. His voice was gentle, practiced. I told him I didn't consent to anything. Sloan wrote something down. I asked to call a lawyer. She smiled. You don't need one right now. The knock came shortly after. 2 officers, polite, detached. They spoke to Ethan first. He handed them a folder. My name was on the tab. I tried to explain, to speak clearly, to slow my breathing so they couldn't call it hysteria. But every word I said had already been pre-translated. Anger became agitation. Fear became paranoia. Resistance became threat. When I reached for my phone, they took it. When I stood up, they guided me down. When I said his name, Ethan, he didn't look at me. That hurt more than the cuffs. As they led me out, Sloan avoided my eyes. She didn't need to look. She'd already won. The door closed behind me with a sound I would hear for the next 2 years. Metal, final, certain. That was the night I learned something brutal. You don't have to be guilty to be locked away. You just have to be inconvenient to the right people with the right paperwork. And as the car pulled away, I realized I wasn't being taken somewhere to get better. I was being removed from the life they wanted to live without me. They didn't call it a prison. They called it a facility. White walls, soft voices, locked doors that closed without sounding locked. Time behaved differently there. Days melted into each other until I stopped counting. They took my clothes, my shoes, my name. I became a wristband and a bed number. The first week, I cried when the lights went out. The second week, I learned not to. Crying attracted attention. Attention invited notes. Notes followed you. I learned how to sit still, how to answer questions with just enough words to sound cooperative but not memorable. That skill alone kept me alive. I noticed her on day 17. She sat in the corner during group sessions and never spoke. Older. Gray hair pulled back tight. Hands steady. Everyone else shook in some way. She didn't. One afternoon, she slid a napkin across the table toward me. On it, written in neat small letters, "Stop trying to convince them. They don't decide truth. They decide timelines." I didn't look at her. Looking meant interest. Interest meant observation. That night, she sat beside me in the common room. She introduced herself as Margaret. She'd been there longer than me, much longer. She didn't ask what I'd done. She asked who had done it with me. When I told her about Ethan, about Sloan, about the paperwork, she nodded. No shock, no sympathy. Recognition. "They don't need you to be crazy," she said softly. "They just need you documented." Margaret taught me the rules no one explains. Never react first. Never contradict staff in public. Never cry in front of cameras. She taught me how to remember without writing. Faces, dates, words that repeated themselves too often to be accidents. "Memory is the only thing they can't confiscate," she told me. Some nights she'd whisper names to herself. Men, companies, institutions, a pattern. I realized then this place wasn't full of broken people. It was full of inconvenient ones. Women who inherited money. Women who asked questions. Women who refused to sign. Margaret said something to me once that I carried for 2 years. "Freedom isn't leaving this place," she said. "It's walking out with leverage." That was the first time I stopped trying to get out and started planning what I would do when they finally let me go. The day they released me, Margaret didn't hug me. She didn't say good luck or stay strong. She handed me an address. No explanation, no phone number, just a folded piece of paper pressed into my palm. "Wait 3 days," she said, "then go there." That was all. When I stepped outside, the world felt too loud, too fast, like it had been waiting to remind me how small I'd become. I did exactly what she said. For 3 days, I stayed invisible. I walked. I slept in public places. I listened. On the 4th morning, I took a bus to the edge of the city. The house didn't look important. Small, faded paint, overgrown hedges, the kind of place no one notices twice. I knocked once. Margaret opened the door. She looked different outside, lighter, sharper. Inside, the house changed shape. Walls lined with boxes, old filing cabinets, laptops stacked like books. Not chaos, organization. This wasn't a home. It was an archive. Margaret poured tea with hands that never shook. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She asked what I remembered. Dates, names, exact phrases Ethan used. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "They always reuse language," she said. "It saves them time." She showed me a room in the back, 1 table, 3 monitors, a whiteboard covered in arrows and names. I saw some I recognized, and others I shouldn't have. Corporations, foundations, law firms. "What is this?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a folder. My name was already on it, typed, clean. She'd been waiting for me longer than I realized. "This is where people come," she said, "when the system finishes eating them." I felt something shift in my chest. Not hope, clarity. Margaret looked at me carefully and said the first real question since I'd been released. "Do you want your life back?" she asked. "Or do you want to make sure he can never do this again?" I didn't hesitate. Both. That was the moment I stopped being someone who survived and became someone who was preparing to end something. Margaret didn't rush me. She never did. The first rule, she said, was understanding the damage before trying to undo it. So we started with paper, bank statements, property records, trust documents. 2 years of my absence compressed into neat columns. Ethan hadn't panicked when I disappeared. He'd prepared. Within 6 months, my name was removed from joint accounts under temporary guardianship. He'd claimed it was for my protection. A judge had agreed. There were signatures I didn't recognize but carried my name anyway. Consent redefined. Our house was refinanced, then sold again to a shell company with a familiar mailing address, Sloan's. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his infrastructure. Margaret introduced me to the attorney she trusted with only one thing: truth. His office was small. His questions were precise. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked who filed the first petition, who signed the medical affidavit, who recommended the evaluator. Every answer circled back to the same 2 names: Ethan, Sloan. The attorney leaned back in his chair and said something quietly devastating. "This wasn't about control," he said. "It was about erasure." He showed me a timeline. While I was locked away, Ethan had changed beneficiaries, redirected insurance, updated corporate bylaws. I wasn't just removed from my marriage. I was removed from the future. Then came the foundation, the mental health nonprofit. It wasn't charity. It was insulation, grants, tax shields, public goodwill. A man who survived tragedy couldn't possibly be questioned. That's when Margaret slid a file across the table. Inside were names, other women, different states, different years, same pattern: brief marriages, sudden diagnoses, clean exits. Some had disappeared completely. I felt the room tilt. Ethan wasn't reckless. He was systematic. Margaret watched me carefully as the truth settled. "Most people stop here," she said, "when they realize the scale." I didn't. Because somewhere between the lies and the forged signatures, I saw something else, a weakness. Patterns don't just repeat, they leave gaps. And in those gaps, mistakes. The attorney closed the file. "If we move," he said, "we move carefully." Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd known her. "Good," she said, "because he thinks she's gone." She looked at me. "He has no idea you're already inside his paperwork." Margaret warned me this part would hurt. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was familiar. Ethan's foundation was hosting a fundraising gala downtown. Glass walls, soft music, people in expensive clothes talking about healing between sips of champagne. I didn't wear black. I didn't wear red. I wore gray, neutral, unthreatening. The kind of woman you don't notice until she's already standing beside you. The moment I walked in, I felt it. The shift. Conversations bending, eyes narrowing. A few people recognizing me without knowing where from. I waited. Timing mattered. Ethan took the stage with practiced ease. He spoke about resilience, about standing by loved ones in their darkest moments. I watched him tell my story without using my name. Then Sloan joined him, hand on his arm, smile calibrated. She scanned the room and froze, just for a second. That was enough. Ethan followed her gaze. When his eyes landed on me, something inside him misfired. Not fear, calculation. He recovered quickly. That was his gift. He smiled as if seeing a ghost was merely inconvenient. After the applause, he approached me with witnesses nearby. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Concerned, protective, exactly as expected. "I was invited," I replied. Calm, Measured? That unsettled him more than shouting ever could. He introduced me to donors as if I were a distant cousin. He touched my elbow, the same spot he used to squeeze when he wanted me quiet. "This isn't appropriate," he murmured. "You're not well." There it was, the script. I smiled. "Neither is exploiting someone's illness," I said, just loud enough for the woman beside us to hear. Sloane stepped in immediately. "She's confused," she said kindly. "She's been through so much." The crowd leaned in. I could feel the moment tipping. I didn't push. I let it fall. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm documented." Silence. Not shock. Recognition. Ethan's jaw tightened. He ended the conversation politely, efficiently. Security appeared minutes later. They didn't touch me. They didn't have to. As I was escorted out, I saw Ethan already surrounded by reassurance. People patting his back, telling him he did the right thing. I walked into the night with my dignity intact and my recording still running. Because the goal wasn't to win that room. It was to remind him, and everyone watching, that the woman he erased was standing in public, calm, coherent, and very much alive. And for the first time, I saw it. The crack. The backlash didn't come loudly, it came politely. Emails that stopped replying, calls that went straight to voicemail, smiles that thinned when I entered a room. By morning, the narrative was already written. A troubled woman had disrupted a charity event. A fragile ex-wife had resurfaced unexpectedly. Concerned voices, sympathetic headlines. Ethan never said my name. He didn't have to. People filled in the blanks for him. A former colleague texted me, "I hope you're getting help." A friend I trusted wrote, "Maybe this isn't the time." My landlord left a notice on the door. Background check issue. Lease terminated. Margaret warned me this would happen. "Public doubt is cheaper than prison," she said. I tried to apply for work anyway. Every interview ended the same way. Careful questions, long pauses, polite rejection emails sent within hours. Someone had made calls, someone with credibility. Sloane posted a photo that afternoon. Her and Ethan, hands intertwined, captioned with words like strength and moving forward. Comments flooded in. "You're so brave. You did everything you could. Some people just don't want to be saved." That night, I sat on the floor of Margaret's back room surrounded by boxes of other people's lives, women who had fallen and never gotten back up. I finally felt it then. Not anger, grief. For the version of myself who believed truth alone was enough. Margaret didn't comfort me. She handed me a folder. Inside was a spreadsheet, dates, transfers, shell accounts, a money trail that hadn't been meant for me. "They always get sloppy here," she said, "when they think the story is settled." I looked at the numbers until they stopped blurring. I understood something critical. Ethan didn't fear exposure. He feared interruption. And I had just interrupted him. That meant he would move faster, take bigger risks, trust the wrong people, which meant this wasn't the end. It was the pressure point, and somewhere inside the isolation, inside the loss of everything I thought I needed, I felt something solid take shape, resolve, because if he wanted me silent, ashamed, and gone, then I would give him exactly what he didn't expect. Patience. I should have seen it coming. Margaret would say, "Betrayal always wears a familiar face." Her name was Claire, my sister, the person who sat beside me in emergency rooms, who knew every version of me before Ethan ever did. She found me 2 weeks after the gala, said she was worried, said she didn't recognize the person the internet was describing. I wanted to believe her. That was my weakness. We met at a coffee shop. Public, safe. She cried first, apologized for not fighting harder when I disappeared. Said Ethan had convinced her it was necessary. That word again, necessary. She asked questions. Too many. About Margaret, about where I was staying, about what I remembered. I answered carefully. Not carefully enough. 3 days later, Margaret's computer was accessed remotely, not hacked, logged into. Someone used credentials only one other person knew. Claire called me that night. Her voice was shaking. She said Ethan had shown up at her place, that he'd been gentle, understanding. He said he just wanted closure. He showed her documents, photos of me inside the facility, medication lists, clinical language that made me sound dangerous. He told her I was being manipulated, that I was dragging others down with me. Then he offered her something: protection, a lawyer, a financial cushion, a way to make sure I didn't hurt myself or anyone else. All she had to do was keep him informed, not spy, just help. She cried while she told me this, said she didn't mean to hurt me, said she thought she was helping. I closed my eyes and felt something in me break cleanly in half. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a transaction. Margaret listened quietly as I repeated every word. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. People don't betray you because they hate you, she said. They do it because they want to stay safe. I asked her what we were going to do. She looked at me with something like respect. We don't confront her, she said. We use her. My stomach turned. Margaret leaned closer. If he thinks he owns your blood, she said, let him believe it. That was the moment I understood the final rule. You don't survive people like Ethan by being honest. You survive them by being exact. Margaret didn't raise her voice. That's how I knew this mattered. She closed the laptop, turned off the monitors. The room went quiet in a way I hadn't felt before. You're still thinking like a victim, she said. The words landed hard, clean, undeniable. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain Claire, blood, history. Margaret stopped me with a single look. He didn't steal your sister, she said. He exposed her price. That hurt more than anything Ethan had done, because it meant there was nothing left to misunderstand. Margaret pulled out a folder thicker than the rest. Inside were timelines, patterns, cross-referenced names. She pointed to one column. Every woman who survived, she said, did one thing wrong. I waited. They wanted to be believed, she continued. They wanted the truth to save them. She slid the folder toward me. The women who won, she said, stopped asking permission. I felt something shift then. Not rage, not despair, control. Margaret leaned forward. Ethan doesn't fear exposure, she said. He fears loss of structure. She tapped the page. Money, reputation, legal insulation. She looked at me. He doesn't see you as an enemy, she said. He sees you as a liability that failed to disappear. I asked her what that made me now. She smiled slightly. A variable, she said, and variables break systems. She outlined the rules. No emotional reactions, no direct confrontation, no public accusations, only leverage. From now on, she said, every move you make must give him confidence. I didn't understand. You're going to let him believe he's winning, she explained, that you're unstable, isolated, desperate. She paused, and you're going to make him greedy. That was the first time since my release that I felt steady, not hopeful, prepared. Margaret handed me a phone, new number, new identity. From this moment on, she said, you don't want justice. She looked me in the eye. You want compliance. I took the phone, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't ask what would happen next. I already knew. Greed always leaves fingerprints. Ethan was careful, but not patient. Once he believed I was destabilized, isolated, and being handled by my sister, he relaxed. Margaret called it the arrogance window. That's when we found the transfers. Not large amounts, not dramatic, just enough to disappear quietly. Consulting fees, vendor payments, foreign services, all routed through the foundation. Charity money washed until it smelled like success. The attorney traced it further. Offshore accounts, shell companies nested inside shell companies, addresses that led to empty offices and locked mailboxes. One name appeared repeatedly. Not Sloane's, someone higher, someone Ethan reported to. That was the first time I understood the scale. This wasn't a man panicking after a divorce. This was a man exiting a system before it collapsed. Margaret zoomed in on a calendar, highlighted dates, one in red. "Why that one?" I asked. She didn't answer. She handed me another file. Passport applications, expedited, 2 names. Ethan, Sloane, same destination, no return date. My chest tightened. "They're running," I said. "No," Margaret replied calmly. "They're graduating." She showed me flight manifests, private charter inquiries, large asset liquidations disguised as restructuring. He wasn't fleeing. He was cashing out. And then, the mistake. A wire transfer scheduled too early, too visible, to an account that had once belonged to a woman who hadn't survived. Margaret's jaw set. "That's how they always end it," she said. "They recycle the dead." I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking abstract. This wasn't about me anymore. I was a loose end, and loose ends get cut. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. Ethan's voice came through warm and measured. "I heard you've been struggling," he said. "I want to help." I closed my eyes and let my voice shake just enough. "I don't know what to do anymore," I said. There was a pause, then satisfaction. "Let's talk," he said. "In person." Margaret watched me carefully as I ended the call. "They've started the clock," she said. I nodded. Because now I knew something crucial. Ethan didn't think he was escaping. He thought he was finishing. We didn't lose the evidence. We almost did. It started with a delay. One file wouldn't open, then another. Margaret's system froze for less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds was enough. Someone had tried to wipe the archive remotely. Not brute force, not sloppy, targeted, precise. Only the folders tied to Ethan. I felt the room go cold. "This wasn't Claire," I said. Margaret nodded. "She wouldn't be subtle." The attorney arrived within the hour. No coat, no pleasantries. He confirmed what we already knew. One of his junior associates had been approached weeks ago, offered money, future protection. He hadn't taken it, but he'd talked. That was all it took. The system didn't need to destroy everything, just enough to break the chain of custody. Margaret pulled the power without hesitation. Screens went dark. Silence slammed into the room. For the first time since this began, I felt fear sharpen into something physical. If Ethan realized we were this close, he wouldn't negotiate. He'd erase. Margaret looked at me. "This is the point of no return," she said. "If we stop now, you disappear quietly." I thought of the women in the files. The names that ended abruptly. The accounts that closed the same week they did. "I'm not stopping," I said. She nodded once. "Good," she said. "Then we accelerate." We split the data, encrypted drives, multiple locations, dead man protocols. If anything happened to me, everything would surface. That was our insurance. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "He's asking questions. He knows you're planning something." I typed back slowly. "I'm scared. I don't know who to trust." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Margaret watched the screen. "He's pulling her closer," she said. "That means he's preparing to move." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. By morning, flight times had changed. Accounts were being rushed, meetings canceled. Ethan wasn't tying loose ends anymore. He was cutting them. Margaret stood at the board and drew a single line through the plan. "We don't wait for him to leave," she said. I felt my pulse steady. "Then we meet him where he feels safest," I said. She smiled grimly. "Exactly. Because when men like Ethan panic, they don't run to hide. They run to close deals. And we knew exactly where that deal was going to happen." Margaret never talked about herself. Not once. In a house full of other people's secrets, hers was the only one never written down. That changed the night we finalized the new plan. She locked the doors, closed the blinds, turned off the lights except for one desk lamp. Then she brought out a box I had never seen before. No labels, no dates, just weight. Inside were photos, old ones, a younger woman, same posture, same eyes, different name. Margaret. Before she became what she is now, she told me the story without drama. A husband in finance, a company that moved money the way others moved air, a diagnosis that appeared overnight after she asked the wrong questions. She was institutionalized for 14 months, not because she was unstable, because she wouldn't sign. When she was released, her husband was gone. Her assets were gone, and the system had closed ranks. She found the pattern the way survivors do, slowly, painfully, names repeated, law firms recycled, foundations bloomed on the ruins of women's lives. Ethan wasn't the architect. He was a middle manager, useful, replaceable. I felt the weight of it settle. "Why me?" I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Because you survived intact," she said. "They broke your life, but they didn't break your mind." She leaned closer. "And because Ethan made a mistake." I waited. "He thought you were small," she said. "Contained, erasable." She opened another folder. Inside were my evaluations, margins filled with notes, too coherent, too consistent, too aware. "They expected you to fade," Margaret said. "You didn't." That's when I understood. I wasn't just undoing what he did to me. I was closing a loop that had been open for decades. Margaret looked tired for the first time since I met her. "This ends with you," she said, "or it doesn't end at all." I thought about Ethan's voice on the phone, his confidence, his assumption. I nodded. "Then let's finish it." Margaret handed me a slim device, a recorder, encrypted, red light waiting. "One conversation," she said. "That's all we need." I took it, and in that moment I finally understood the truth. I wasn't bait. I was the blade. We didn't improvise. Every second was mapped. Every word had a purpose. The location mattered. Neutral ground. Private enough to feel safe, public enough to leave traces. A glass conference room inside a co-working space downtown. Cameras in the hallway, keycard logs. Witnesses who wouldn't realize they were witnessing anything. Ethan chose it himself. That was important. Margaret dressed me in exactly what he expected. Soft colors, loose sleeves, a woman trying not to look afraid. I practiced my breathing until my hands shook only when I wanted them to. The recorder was clipped inside my jacket, red light hidden, waiting. Margaret reviewed the rules one last time. Let him talk, let him explain, never accuse, never correct. "Men like him," she said, "confess when they think they're being reasonable." Claire texted at noon. "He says this is the last meeting. He wants to help you move on." I smiled. Of course he did. Ethan arrived early. Suit immaculate, expression sympathetic. He stood when I entered like a gentleman. "I'm glad you came," he said. Concerned, controlled. I sat down slowly. "I don't know who else to ask," I said. Voice low, uncertain. That was the key. Relief flickered across his face. He began explaining things to me the way one explains a necessary amputation. The money, the decisions, the paperwork. How everything had been done to protect me. "How dangerous it would have been," he said gently, "to let you stay in control." I asked small questions. Not why. How? How did the judge agree? How did the accounts move so fast? How did the doctors know what to write? Each answer tightened the net. He leaned back, confident now. "You don't need to fight anymore," he said. "I've taken care of everything." That was the sentence, the one Margaret told me would come. I nodded. Tears I didn't feel blurred my vision. "So, if I cooperate," I whispered, "this all goes away?" Ethan smiled, the real one. "Yes," he said. "It already has." I let the silence stretch, long enough for the recorder to drink every word. Outside the room, security walked past. The city moved. And Ethan, believing the story was over, did exactly what men like him always do. He explained how it had been done. Ethan thought the meeting was over. That was the mistake. He stood up first, extended his hand, the gesture of a man who believed he had finished cleaning up. "I'll have my lawyer send you the paperwork," he said kindly. "After today, we can both move on." Move on. I stayed seated. "I just want to understand one thing," I said softly. He paused, turned back. "Yes?" I looked up at him. "Did you ever worry," I asked, "that I might remember everything?" He smiled, no hesitation. "No," he said, "because memory without credibility is just noise." That was enough. I reached into my jacket and placed the recorder on the table. Red light blinking, alive. Ethan's face didn't change right away. Men like him don't panic first. They calculate. He laughed lightly, a reflex. "You think that proves something?" he asked. "You're not stable. No one will—" The glass wall behind him lit up, not literally, figuratively. Two people appeared outside the room, badges visible, calm, unhurried. Federal investigators don't rush. Ethan's mouth opened, closed. For the first time, he didn't know which version of himself to use. The door opened. One of them spoke his name, not loudly, not aggressively, as if this were just the next scheduled item. Sloane arrived seconds later. Her heels stopped short when she saw the badges. The room fractured. Ethan tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to redirect. Too late. The recorder wasn't the weapon. It was the invitation. The files, the transfers, the timeline, all of it had already been delivered. As they escorted him out, Ethan looked at me, not with anger, with disbelief. "You weren't supposed to—" he started. I met his eyes. "I learned from you," I said. Sloane didn't look back. She already knew who would be blamed first. The hallway filled with quiet attention. Phones lifted. Whispers started. By the time the elevator doors closed, Ethan's story, the one he'd rehearsed for years, was already collapsing. And I remained seated alone in the room, listening to the city outside, breathing steadily, because the hardest part was finally over. Not the revenge, the waiting. I didn't watch the news. I didn't need to. Margaret did. She read quietly at the kitchen table while I made coffee with hands that no longer shook. Charges, investigations, assets frozen, words that used to feel abstract now had weight. Ethan didn't vanish the way he planned. He unraveled. Partners distanced themselves. The foundation suspended operations. Donors asked questions that couldn't be softened. Sloane disappeared first. That didn't surprise me. People like her always know when the tide has turned. Ethan fought harder. He always did. But leverage only works when you have something left to lose. And by the time the court dates were set, he didn't. I testified once. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just clearly. Dates, facts, language. The same tools he once used against me. When it was over, no one applauded. Justice rarely looks cinematic from the inside. It looks like silence where fear used to live. I didn't get everything back. That's not how this works. Some things are gone forever. But I got enough. My name, my agency, my right to exist without being explained. I moved out of Margaret's house 3 months later. Not far, just far enough to feel like my own choice. We didn't say goodbye. We never did. Some people aren't meant to be chapters. They're meant to be turning points. On my first morning alone, I opened the windows and let the city in. Traffic, voices, life. Nothing extraordinary happened. And that's how I knew it was over. Because real freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's waking up without permission. It's walking outside without wondering who's watching. It's knowing that the man who tried to erase you will spend the rest of his life being explained by other people. He imprisoned me for 2 years because of his mistress. But the day I was released was never about escape. It was about consequence. And this time, it wasn't mine.